Hi, and welcome to the Teacher Mentor Podcast with Hugh Herndon. A quick introduction to this week's guest. I have known Ovett Wilson for over a decade, and the time we spent together during my initial years in public education were foundational to my career. I wanted to speak to him about the role of mentoring and the challenge facing educators. I am honored to have Ovett, a distinguished leader in Hillsborough County in Florida. Ovett Wilson was born in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and was raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Mr. Wilson relocated to Tampa to attend the University of South Florida after high school, where he attained a bachelor's degree in English education, a master's in educational leadership, and a doctorate in turnaround educational leadership. Mr. Wilson began his teaching career at Middleton High School, an inner-city school in the heart of Tampa. His zest for teaching and innate ability to connect with his students helped him establish a solid and credible reputation at Middleton. His accolades included winning Hillsborough County Teacher of the Year and the Ida S. Baker Teacher Award. While as a teacher, Mr. Wilson developed the passion to train teachers. He later became a district trainer with staff development. His first assistant principal appointment was in 2006 to Chamberlain High School, where his role was paramount in reforming the culture of the school. After Chamberlain, he was later appointed as assistant principal for curriculum at Farrell's Girls Preparatory Academy, a single-gender middle school in Hillsborough County. After 2 years at Farrell, Mr. Wilson was called upon to become an assistant principal at Van Buren Middle School due to the critical needs of the school. In 2015, he was appointed principal at Van Buren, where he resurrected the failing school. He was then tasked to run Calhoun Elementary Magnet School and Van Buren at the same time, with the intentions of creating a new merged school. He was the principal of Dr. Carter G. Woodson Pre-K through 8th Grade Leadership Academy for 5 years. Currently, Mr. Wilson is the principal of Pizzo K-8, and he is excited about the future and endless possibilities ahead. Mr. Wilson's greatest desire above all is to be a man of faith and to love his beautiful wife, Adrian, and his 2 incredible sons, Jaden and Josiah. All right, hi, and my name is Hugh Herndon, and welcome to the Teacher Mentor Podcast. I'm with Ovett Wilson. He is principal at a middle school. What is the name of the middle school?
Pizzo K-8.
Pizzo K-8. And I had the pleasure of working with Ovett when I was beginning my career many years ago in Hillsborough County. Ovett was my mentor, a colleague in the English department. And so I wanted to speak with Ovett about teaching, the role of mentor, and kind of just the shortage of teaching that we have in Florida across the nation, especially since COVID hit. And so Ovett, when we started the teaching shortage, I actually, it wasn't to the degree that it is now, but the statistic was that after 3 years, 50% of educators would leave the field. And this is my I think my 15th year in education. And that hasn't changed. And so, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges with either recruitment or teacher retention that you see? Because in the classroom, being in the classroom solely, not in leadership, a lot of times it's either the pay, which the administrators have no real influence over, right? It's sometimes the curriculum is frustrating, or you have curriculum shifts or testing shifts. But again, that's outside the wheelhouse of administration. So what are the challenges that you see as far as bringing in? Because that's the goal to some degree, is to retain the teachers through this podcast that are there, to encourage them, to equip them, and then to hopefully draw in new teachers, because I think we fundamentally need a class of educators, professional class of educators, that this is their calling, this is where they're staying, not individuals that are in here for 5 or 6 years and then they just rotate out.
Yeah. I mean, you really bring up a great point. I'll start with this because I think it's a very important. Pay is an act of value. And I'm telling you now, whatever, like, there's a reason why a manager gets paid different than just a front room clerk or whatever the case may be, right?
Hmm.
It's because of the value we place on a position. And unfortunately for educators, um, the dollars doesn't communicate the importance of the profession. Now, listen, I'm not saying that is correct because I do personally believe that an educator is the most important individual in a society. You cannot like have a society of uneducated people. It will begin to crumble.
Hmm.
You see that across many facets across the world. And so you have to have an educate. By the way, think about it. School is a form of social control. What would you
Yeah.
do if you didn't have kids in school? I mean, look at
Yeah.
summer times and what happened during the summer months.
So funny enough, I told you before we got on that I briefly was in Tampa Police Department, and I think it was like springtime, and they were talking about the anticipation of crime because the kids were going to be out of school, and so it's like it's a given thing.
Absolutely.
So once school gets out, they expect to have an increase. So that means more beat cops, more patrols, and things like this. And
Absolutely.
everyone's like in the bullpen, like, oh, I just can't wait till fall and kids go back to school.
For sure. So honestly, I'll start there. I think pay is an issue because you have to be able to respect the fact that educators have to take care of their families. They have responsibilities that they have to take care of. So that's one arm of the leg. The second arm is obviously students and their conduct. I think sometimes teachers get burned out. Um, Teachers may go in thinking that kids are going to act a certain way, not realizing that kids don't act that way, or kids used to act a certain way when they were in school in comparison to what's happening now. Case in point, COVID. Whew,
Oh.
that window of COVID transformed kids' behavior nationally.
Mhm.
If you look at any report, you'll see a spike, uptick in student discipline as a result of being out of school and having to come back and socialize with their peers. So that's another factor. The demands of the job has increased. You think about the accountability of the job has increased. So there are many factors that are causing burnout in educators across the nation. And when I remember when they introduced the concept of burnout, they looked at the guy who introduced it and laughed at him. But now it's one of the most studied fields as it relates to any genre because you're going to suffer burnout. And if you don't get in front of what it is that's causing the burnout, it's going to multiply. And we're seeing a great shortage in educators. And what are you going to do? You have classes that are sitting without a teacher and
Mhm.
kids are showing up every day. Like that's a crisis waiting to happen for a nation.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I talked to you briefly before, and I mentioned that I had some promo material, and it's a video that's going to be released by the time this is out. But it's called "Filthy Rich," and it talks about this. It's, I don't know the best way to describe it. My intention is like when I go to the gym, I like to listen to like the motivational like videos or speeches or whatever, and that's what I wanted for that. And so the whole thesis, if you will, for the Filthy Rich is the idea that teachers are not valued enough economically, right? But that shouldn't reflect our desire for the profession. And that's where I think it has been the biggest struggle for me, is that I have to realign that my value is not proportionally reflected in my bank account. So,
Sure.
after being in the system for 15 years, like I'll go around and I will see students everywhere now. And I'm sure you have as well, right? And to have those interactions sometimes, I mean, I was out just this weekend, I don't know, it was like 9 o'clock, something like this, at a restaurant, brand new restaurant, hadn't been there ever before. And the hostess is like, and she looks at you, and points that finger in that way, and you're like, you're a student, and then you're like, okay, how many years do you go back, and things like that. And so I'm 100% on board with the social responsibility and the need for it, because one of my talking points is like, what's the alternative? Because in America, it seems it's disparaging or praising, but there's no middle ground to, okay, what's the steps to solve the problem, And so I will listen to individuals who will espouse charter schools, and charter schools are good for those individuals and families that can afford them, or that it works with their structure, and that particular student. But on a whole scale level, public schools are by and far the only way that I can see that can massively transform a citizenry. And you were talking about that. If you look at the countries,
For sure.
And so I'm. What do you think? In Florida, there's a bill. I'm not sure if it's what the progress is. I checked the other day, but the starting salary would be raised to $65,000. And I believe it's a congressman out of Miami that has done this. Do you think that solving the economic factor would entice more individuals to come to the profession?
Let me put it this way. If you pay a teacher $100,000 a year, the line to hire teachers,
that's true,
would wrap around your school 1,000 times.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
So you have to be able to say, wait, pause a minute. This issue of pay as an act of value is really serious, right? And so the fact of the matter is that teacher shortage could be solved overnight. It really could.
It's funny. I've got a friend that's in Huntsville, and I visited him, and he's like, you should check out this place. It's a pretty developing place. The cost of living is like lower than the national average. You've got NASA, you've got Boeing, you've got industry there. It's growing. Florida's growing too, but I mean, it's just this area actually has room for growth, right? And so just for fun, I just went to see what the local community school districts were, and it's like $15,000-$20,000 more, and I'm like, my word, like it. But then again, when I started to do some dig, like now they are now their evaluation, their standards are higher, right? And so it's like, okay, that's good too, because if we raise, I think that's something that is sometimes not always communicated in the conversation, because I think some people may not see the benefit in raising the taxes to pay for the teachers, but if you do that though, then conversely, like the standard of the teacher is going to increase. Now, if you have, like you said, a line of people for the $100,000 high school teaching position, right, then you as the administrator can be a lot more selective.
Yeah, quality control.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely. You have to look at the rigor of you getting in my building to teach at that point, because I'm only hiring the best of the best if the line is wrapped around several times around my building. I get to choose the top cream to educate the nation. Can you imagine the product of what's going to come out? It will be absolutely amazing, because at the end of the day, like you're transferring a knowledge base as a teacher to a student. You need good teachers, because if you don't have them, that knowledge does not transfer at the depth and level that it needs to.
Yeah, no, that is so right. And in talking about the pay, like I think also there's two sides that I think are overlooked. I think one, like I will talk to individuals every now and then that are not in education, and they'll always throw in the summer aspect, which is a fair point in the sense that you are paid. If you prorate it out, depending on which district you are in the county, like it can work against you to some degree. But I was looking at starting salary, and I was looking at like rent in the Tampa Bay area, and so they use the 3 times rule, right? So if rent for a house or mortgage rather, or let's say house, apartment rather, is like $2,000 for 2-bedroom house or whatever. Like they're going to want $6,000 a month. Well, there's no teacher that's making starting salary $72,000. And so I also think, okay, so we have these schools of education, but as a profession, like how is it possible for you to live if you can't even go rent an apartment in Tampa because you have to have roommates or you live with mom and dad, but you're a profession, like any other profession, you get done with law school, you get done with medical school. Like they're not having to do side hustles at Publix. They're not having to, live with roommates per se because they have to, but here as in education, it's kind of understood. And so I think those are elements that are missed when we talk about the compensation factor. It's like, yeah, but if you have a 22-year-old that's graduating and wants to change the world, wants to be that transfer knowledge and help grow a mind, if they can't afford a place to live, like that's a problem that the profession can't solve on its own.
Yeah, it's very challenging, and it's discouraging. I mean,
yeah,
let's be honest about it.
Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to talk about mentorship. So I think when you get teachers in to a school, I'm going to stick more to the conversation of an inexperienced teacher.
Sure.
Can you speak to the role of mentorship and how you you either structure it at your school for your new teachers, or someone that you just identify that needs some leveling up, or not in a punitive way necessarily, but you see something in them and you're like, I want to hone your craft. Right. I want you to move up because I see potential in you. So can you just speak for a few minutes on how you see the role of mentoring in education?
Yeah. So as a leader, I look at that in kind of 3 stages, to be honest with you. And it's not just mentoring. Mentoring is an aspect. So you have mentoring, you have coaching, and you have sponsorship. And there are 3 different lanes when you think about them. A mentor is like one who knows the way and can show the way. Right? It's important for that, because if you don't have mentors, like you're going to make some really big mistakes unnecessarily. Yeah. And as a leader, I'm always in the mindset of 4 components, right? I could either be a shopper mentality, I could be a farmer mentality, I could have a coaching mentality, or I could have an editor's mentality. There are 4 different mentalities the leader goes in with. That mentality determines how you mentor, how you coach, and how you sponsor. For example, let me give you an example. If I take a shopper's mentality, I buy something from whatever store you get it from, right? If you don't like it, you take it back and return it. That's a shopper's mentality. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, if I'm thinking from a shopper's mentality, then if I'm getting this individual and not hiring them, if they don't work out immediately for me, I'm going to return them. They're going to have 1 year shelf life and they got to go. Now, if I take the farmer's mentality, that's a different mentality. A farmer's mentality knows that when the seed goes in the ground, it has to take time, right? It has to take effort. It has to take nurturing. There are elements that has to go into place for that one seed to produce a harvest of fruit. Mm-hmm. That's a completely different mentality. It's different than even an editor's mentality. Editors, that's taking someone who may have skill set and saying, okay, let me refine this process for you to get you to your best work, right? And then you have a coach. That's a completely different mentality, right? That's one who says, okay, I am going to look at the strengths, the weaknesses. I'm your external eyes, ears, hands, feet that could see that which you can't because it's in your blind side. And I'm going to build you up to become a better individual in the craft that you're doing. And so those 4 mentalities are totally different. And the posture of the leader, whatever posture they take, it's going to determine how they even mentor, how they coach, and how they sponsor. Hopefully that's making sense.
No, it is. Do you think you could give an example? Because I've been in on a lot of schools since we worked together, and I've seen elements of those 4 approaches, I think, in all the schools. But I haven't seen, I don't know, one encompass all of them, and maybe that's just you're always working towards that type of, what I mean? So maybe one's got, 80% of it or things like this, but have you used that, and what results have you seen by having that approach? Because I think if we combine those two, the teacher retention, and, no one goes into education thinking that only a few years from now, the riches are going to come in. I'm going to have the Maserati. I'm going to have this, right? So for most people, it's either comfort, like dependable schedule, hours. It's good for the family, But I think for a lot of most, I would probably hope to think it's like they like the idea of transmitting their content. They like teaching, like the relationships of it. Yeah. So how do you, I think if we can foster those 4 elements in a leader more effectively, I think then some people might stay that just kind of get burned out that you were talking about. So Absolutely. Can you just walk me through how you've used that in your?
Because I mean, a good leader is going to, believe it or not, have probably all 4 of those components. Because if you have a teacher that's hurtful to children, you need to return them. Like put it this way: if a doctor has 90% complications with their surgery, right? Would you like them cut you open?
Absolutely not.
No, right? But here's a problem: the medical field bury their mistakes. Yeah. Education don't. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's an element where definitely I have to be a shopper in that case. Why? Because you are causing harm to children.
So some non-negotiables.
Correct. However, where do I spend the majority of my time, right? Okay. I want to spend it in the farming, and I want to spend it in the coaching, and I want to spend it in the editing, because those components are going to yield and develop educators, to mentor them so that they could stay in the profession, right? So that they could to develop their presence, so that they could develop their skill set. And the more confident a teacher gets and good at what they do, listen, the sky is the limit. And not only that, because when you find a teacher that has the right calling, you could take them anywhere.
Yeah.
Take them anywhere. And so for me, I look for 3 simple things when I hire. Number 1, are you humble? Number 2, are you coachable? And number 3, are you smart? 3 basic. Because if you're humble, I could take you anywhere. If you're coachable, you will listen to, and I could build you, right? And if you're smart, you could learn. You put those 3 elements together, you have exponential growth very quickly.
Yeah, and I've seen I was not an education major, so I had to go through all of the alternative programs and certifications and things like that. So a lot of the theory I had to learn while I was actually applying it, right? So I didn't have an internship, and now I will supervise interns, and it's interesting to see them put it into practice as they're learning it, where I'm like, I had to learn this the hard way, right? So where do you think new teachers struggle the most in those areas? Because as a teacher, it's easy for me, just like it's probably easy for them to see the areas that I should improve upon, like they should improve upon. And I'm not sure if it's a combination of personalities and just where they're at in their career, or are administrators missing some of those elements? Because I see, for example, you're talking about like the idea of a teacher hurting a child, and I think that doesn't have to be just physical. Like I can see students that have had a bad teacher, and it will crush them, and it will crush them in my class. And I've built so much time building a rapport with them, like trying to get them, and English is not for everyone by any standards, right? They don't want to. It's a mandated class, right? So, that's already kind of working against you. We don't really have a generation of readers and writers, and, so I have to work a lot to get that trust already. And I've seen educators either misguided or I don't know, just not, they're missing something. So they're hurting the kids by, just their approach and their structure. So how do you address that as an administrator when you see that's in there, like someone got through, or you see something's changed with a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, it's honest conversations, to be quite frank with you.
Yeah.
Because you got to be a truth teller. Like, there's no need to tap dance around it, and to help someone see, like they may not even realize that that's a part of their construct. It could be in their blind side, right? And so, as a coach, my job is to help to, hey, listen, I've noticed that your approach to children is negative, or you are using a negative parent voice instead of the adult voice. So, you have those honest conversations with them, and you're helping them to grow. Right. Now, listen, obviously behavior changes. That's what you want. But a lesson is learned when behavior changes. If the behavior doesn't change, the lesson has not been learned. So, you evaluate and you have to make some hard determinations. But the goal is, listen, you want to grow people. Like the role of a leader, the title principal is a new concept, by the way. It was never called principal. It was called lead learner. That was the title. Yes, lead learner. That's what a principal was. And you could look at that in both ways. One, you're leading learning, or you are like really knowledgeable and you're transferring learning. But yeah, that was our title.
Huh. So let's flip a little bit. Where do you think, or where do you see, because you are professionally and then personally on the side invested in education reform. So where do you see the challenges sometimes in getting that approach and leadership at an organization, at a site, at a school, right? Because I've been with administrators that have charisma, that have the confidence of the staff, and that can have those honest conversations with individuals when everyone knows the honest conversations need to be had, right? And then I've been with administrators who don't, and everyone just kind of understands. So where do you think administration as a whole can learn from this approach?
Yeah. So one of the things I like, you've probably heard of Hattie, his work on visible learning. Mm-hmm. One of the things is he talks about teacher credibility. And I always say, hey, if teachers got credibility, there's leadership credibility. Yeah. And teacher credibility has 4 components to it. The first one is, can people trust you? Like, simple enough, right? Yeah. Number 2 is, are you credible? Like, what you're talking about, do you have even a level of expertise within it? Number 3 is dynamic. Are you dynamic? Do you have charisma at what you do? And then the 4th one is connectivity or closeness. How do you connect with kids? Those 4 components make up the teacher credibility. And by the way, students determine how credible a teacher is. And then they determine how much they will learn from the teacher. Because remember, the knowledge that a teacher gives, it's a transaction for a student in class. Yeah. So sales is a transfer of belief. Follow me real quick. Mm-hmm. So when you go to class, you're telling the student, please pay attention. The reason why he's paying attention is because he has to exchange from you the knowledge that the teacher is going to transfer, right? And he's paying the attention so that he could get the information and grow from it. Like, it's a real transaction. And if we understand the depth of what happens every single day in the classroom,
Yeah.
We would take education a lot more serious.
Oh no, definitely. Let's unpack for that second. So go back to the first step that you were saying
Sure.
on teacher
Teacher
credibility.
credibility,
Yeah, the first element to that,
trust.
trust. Okay, so I think, all right, I think to some degree this has been lost on education. I think we've given away a lot of our trust, um, either through, sometimes you've got schools or districts that have kind of replaced a mandated curriculum for a political kind of ideology, a belief, like, and testing, we've taken testing and what it was meant to do to standardize to ascertain whether we actually are doing what we've said. And now it's every day it seems like, there's another test that's being unveiled or whatever. So where do you think, or I've never really thought about it like this, the idea that trust is so inherently necessary, from the student's perspective, in that, how
Oh
can
yeah.
a teacher establish trust?
Yeah.
You know,
So I have a simple formula for trust. Um, Trust equals consistency divided by time.
mm,
The more consistent you are over a span of time, an individual will release trust. Now, Sean Covey, he
mhm.
um, he wrote the 13 high trust. Is it Sean or Steve? One of them wrote the 13 high trust behaviors, right? And anytime I
Okay,
take over a school, I take one of those behaviors, every
yeah,
faculty, and then we cover them
okay,
because I need people to understand high trust behaviors. It is hard to function in education without high trust behaviors. Let me give you a research that's really important. So the high trust behaviors are broken down into two components. The first one is um, competence. I'm sorry. The first one is character. The second one is
mm,
competence. So people are always looking at character, and then they're looking at your competence, and those two are the hallmark of building trust. Now, Hattie's work, the effect size for teacher efficacy, and teacher efficacy is when teachers come together and work together to make sure that the best interests of children are at hand. So
mhm,
PLCs, everyone's collaborating. It's not about ego. It's about making sure that, listen, I noticed that on your PM, your kids are getting this particular standards. What are you doing? Because I'm
mhm,
tanking. Let's flexible regroup. I'll take your kids. I'll teach them that particular standard. You take mine, and you're killing it with this standard because I need you to impart that knowledge that you so graciously have, because I'm noticing on your assessments that kids are getting it. Okay. That takes a level of vulnerability,
oh yeah,
transparency. That's trust.
yeah,
Teacher efficacy, which is the highest return on student achievement, right? 1.57, I believe the effect size is, and 0.40 is a year's worth of growth for effect size. So it's a 1.57. That's huge
mhm,
when teachers collaborate in that sense. But that environment has to be fostered, and it has to be communicated from the top that, listen, there's no big I's, no little U's. We all work together. Why? Because at the end of the day, there's only one thing that matters: how student perform. Are they
yeah,
learning?
that is great. That is great. All right, so the first one was trust. What was the second element?
Competence.
Okay, competence. Yeah. So this is hard for me because I can see sometimes there are certain areas in a school that are going to suffer more, um, like science or math. Like it takes a special person to have the efficacy of an educator with the content knowledge of, a physics class or AP calculus, or something like this. Especially when in that knowledge base, you could apply it outside of education and typically earn more, right? So now you're taking a very capable individual, and you're putting them in a different scenario. So how does competency, or how can you work with a teacher or that may lack competency? How do you bring them up? Those honest conversations. Is there an element of self-reflection that the teacher must have? What exactly do you see as an administrator?
Yeah. So when you think about competence can be grown. I mean, that's the fact of the matter.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things we learned from the book Grit is that 2-part effort overcomes talent. Mm-hmm. 2-part effort will always catch up to talent. Like you could be naturally talented at something, but I guarantee you, if I put the work in twice a day, I'm going to catch up to you eventually.
Yeah.
Right. And so competence can grow. Like when we started as teachers, we weren't fully competent, but over time on task and teaching the material, what you teach, you retain 90%. Right. So after a while, it's going to stick. You can't even help it. It flows out of you like water. Right. And because we have touched the material for so long, over such a long period of time, guess what? I become an expert at my content and field. So competence can grow. Anyone can grow in competence. So that's just the honest truth.
Yeah, no, and that's good too, because I think sometimes I have seen individuals that have come into a classroom like mid-year, like they were hired, and they feel overwhelmed because they have all of the administrative functions of a new teacher, right? So there's all of the programs, all of the procedures that a school may have in place, right? On top of the classroom management, on top of the content. And then there is this underlying fear of competency. Like, even in the English department, like we'll be at lunch and someone will say, have you read, such and such a work? And as an English major, I feel compelled to be like, yeah, I've read that. But there are a ton of works that I haven't.
Of course not.
And so to that element of vulnerability, it's like, no, I haven't read that, and so
yet.
So yeah, definitely the competency, like you have to be able to own that you don't know that, because again, ultimately it's about the student, right? It's what is in the best interest of the student. All right, so you have trust, you have competency. What is the third pillar?
Dynamic.
Oh,
Being dynamic.
Yeah.
It's a little tougher one because not everyone is wired a certain kind of way, but it doesn't mean you can't be dynamic in your own unique way.
Yes.
That's the key right there.
Yes.
Like, I tell people all the time, I say, listen, is it okay not to be like you? It's a tough question to ask people.
What's the question again?
Is it okay not to be like you? It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Now, most people will say, oh, yeah, it's okay not to. But then you bring up certain views or standpoints, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But the reality is, being dynamic, you could be dynamic in your own way. Like you really can.
I think that to be dynamic, though, it takes time. You have to feel. You have to, maybe it kind of feels after you've got the competency, right? You've got the trust, and you can be yourself, because sometimes, like this will happen. Like when I first started to teach, AP was actually when we worked together. It was like, I don't know, I'm 2 years into teaching, right? And I think we were on block schedule too. So like it's like an hour and a half, right? And I have an AP, and then they said, oh, you're going to teach AP. I'm like, okay. And we're reading some text. So we have a textbook, and I've assigned it, and we're reading through it. And we get to this passage. I don't remember the text. And I had no idea. I had no idea what it was. The kids are like, Mr. Herndon, like, what do you think this passage means? And I'm like, I did the teacher deflect, like, that's a good question. What do you think, And then after about 5 minutes of silence, right, you look at the clock and you're like, we got another 70 minutes in here. Like, this question's not going to go away, And,
you can't necessarily pull out like Spark Notes right now because then they're going to see it. So, yeah, you have to have that dynamic approach to be able just to be honest and say, I don't know,
Yeah.
guys, let's learn this together. But I think that dynamic attitude, and like you said, however it is, because having children that have grown up in the public school system, it's interesting because I know them, some teachers like professionally, just only in a professional capacity. And so you form your opinions of them through very superficial interactions. And I might see them at a faculty meeting for like 3 seconds, or, the guy may, cut me in line at the breakfast, to get, whatever he's getting. I'm like, just whatever. Right. But my kids may absolutely love this teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this individual going, I've seen paint with more expression, but they have whatever it is for them. And I think that
some teachers just have the it factor, but you could grow in your dynamic approach or dynamisty, whatever you want to call it. You could teach elements of being dynamic, like even posture. Like when I teach new teachers posture, I teach them that posture is your ability. Presence, I should say. When I teach them presence, I say, listen, presence is your ability to use your posture and your personality to command attention, right? So you could have someone walk in a room, they don't even say a word, but their posture and their personality, like everyone is looking and they don't even know who it is, right? It's the same thing. Teachers could grow in that capacity, like training a teacher to keep their arms above the waist when they teach, because the element of your hands will cause individuals to pay attention to what you're saying, right? Or the movement, how you move. Like those are things that could be taught that many people may not know. For example, my wife is a professor. And so one of the classes that students take in the education field is acting. Can you believe that? Yes.
That's great.
Because it gives them presence. It helps them to develop that component, because part of teaching is theatrics.
Oh yeah. It is definitely.
So if you at least have been trained in that element, you can incorporate it into the art of teaching and the science of teaching.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague, and we were talking about how you have to have a certain kind of professional wall up, because as your students come into your classroom, right? They don't necessarily care that, you and your wife had a fight this morning over something that was stupid, right? And you're waiting for payday because, the car just got fixed and, like you've got life, right? They don't understand those elements of it. But when that bell rings, it's almost like, okay, the show's got to go on. I've got to be happy. I've got to be engaged, because what I present to them, what I project to my students, I may not get back. But if I present and project anything else, if I go in there kind of mopish and meek and quiet, the sharks, they smell water, or they smell blood, and so it's not going to be productive. And then there's even a positive psychology element to it, where you just have to just kind of train yourself to, I got this. So that's great that they take acting.
Yeah.
So
helps them.
All right. And what is the final pillar?
Closeness, being connected.
All right. How do you approach that? Because I have, in that conversation I was having, it's the podcast title is a conversation with Erica Watts. We were talking about how sometimes it's hard to, as educators, we're told to be professional and to have a wall up, but sometimes the kids need to see. And I think COVID was a wonderful, in some ways, example of that, because here we are going through a pandemic. We're trying to figure out everything. And even afterwards, when schools are back in session, right? And you've got some kids wearing masks, and some kids, that are still a little awkward. They're not sure how this is going to go, and things like this. And everyone's been changed by it. Even if they haven't lost anyone to COVID, for the last year and a half, they've been at home isolated, perhaps quarantined for certain, days or weeks, depending on their family, right? So everyone's impacted at some level. You put them back into a school, okay, and say, all right, same school rules as apply. And it's like, well, no, you need to have some connectedness to them. You have to be able to relate to them, I think, to do that trust. So how do you, as an administrator, like encourage, but you have to, it's almost like Harry Wong said, you give a little bit of, you give a little bit of freedom. Like you go in there almost like a dictator at first, right? You just kind of wrench out a little bit of freedom, right? Because it's always easier to pull it back if you have to, but if you let them go the first day, like you'll never get them back after that. So how do you try to convey to teachers the element of closeness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to think about human connection, right? Like what connects us, and if a teacher could find the elements that connect them with students, it helps. For example, storytelling. Storytelling is the best, especially if you could weave it into lessons, right?
Mm-hmm.
To help students see the human side of who you are. You're teaching about whatever, or Hamlet or whatever. And, hey, I was in love once, or, Romeo and Juliet, whatever the case may be. Like that, kids will eat at out of the palm of your hands if you become a good storyteller. It is the greatest way to bond. Look at the best speakers. The best speakers are great storytellers. Look at the best comedians.
Yeah.
They're great storytellers. Look at the best musicians. They tell stories.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, like, when a teacher recognized the art of storytelling and could utilize it effectively, masterclass.
Well, that is great. Yeah, that is great. Well, you've given me a lot to think about as a teacher, and then as just as a colleague, right? When I see those individuals or new teachers as they come on. As we close, if you could give just a couple pieces of advice to teachers, to new teachers, to experienced teachers, what would that be from an administrator? Because I think sometimes, depending on your administrator, they may have an open door policy, and you may feel very comfortable going and telling them. And then I've worked with some administrators where I'm surprised they know my name, and that's just, that's just the way it is, and so if you had any type of leadership advice to a teacher, what would that be?
Probably would be a couple. First, I would start by saying, be kind to yourself, right? Okay. Especially if you're a new teacher, be kind. You're building what is called episodic knowledge. And so episodic knowledge is the fact that you have never ran the episode of being a teacher. It is your first year. Like you're just learning. The second episode is always different than the first episode because you've built the knowledge where, remember your first fight and you were like, oh my gosh. The second fight, you were like, Johnny. The third one, you looked at him and sit down. Like episodic knowledge gave you.
In television, the first episode of every show is called pilot because they don't know if it's going to take off.
There you go. There you go. Right? You don't know.
Yeah.
So give yourself grace. You're building episodic knowledge.
That's great.
And as you build the episodic knowledge, you're going to get better at what you do, especially if you're serious about your craft.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, when you're serious about your craft and you want to be the best, Herndon, listen to me. Listen. Like, I know I am a great administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I say it. I put the work in, Herndon.
Yeah.
You understand? I'm a student of my craft.
Right.
Like a student. And I stay hungry. I lick the plate. And hunger is an intense desire, right? A compelling craving. That's what I am. To be the best at what I do. And if people could just like take a hunger mentality of getting better, licking the plate, to just be the best educator, oh my gosh, man, you would turn the world upside down. You will spark the mind that will change the world forever. That's what educators do. We touch eternity.
That is great. I think I think we'll end there, because that's why I wanted to start the podcast, was to just kind of inspire and keep a lot of people that I think have good intentions and have great ability to transform lives. And that's what we have.
Teachers are the greatest influencers.
That's cool.
None other as influential as we are. Trust me. I don't care what pop star out there, they had a teacher.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you, Ovett, for joining us. And hopefully next time we can get back together. It won't be too long.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, my brother.
All right. Stay online.
Yep.